Our way for a show. Let us launch our opening logo. The exciting world of analog ancient devices, suitable for somebody as ancient and analog as myself. We'll have to explain to the youngins about dial telephones. And of course, tortucanwordpress.com, where there's a bunch of free stuff that you can share far and wide to remind people of why creationism is a pile of dingoes' kidneys, and then that will act as the gateway portal for them to get the serious, more recent stuff from the book department. Well. So here we are. This will be simultaneously a Titans week and also the next installment of our Luskin series. Isn't that delightful? This one, we're now, as we noted last week, we gave the overview for the whole issue of the hadrosaurs and how few taxa they were dealing with. Well, now we actually get into some actual critters. And the first taxa are ones that I suspect that Sarfati and Tay are bringing up because they have that soft tissue connection or seemingly helpful for the catastrophic flood geology model, so that they're feeling comfortable bringing them up. Corythosaurus, which is a typical hadrosaur with a fairly big crest on the top. Zero technical papers citing on it, nothing in their notes. But they did cite a creationist, Robinson from 2020, which I'll be putting the link up to, who is misrepresenting the DNA fragments that were found in a related taxon, Hippocrosaurus. Again, not actually citing the technical paper on it, incidentally, but as it turns out, that paper is going to be lobbed later on in Sarfati and Tay when they're talking about the soft tissue stuff later on. So I'm not going to be bothering about putting a link up to it this time because we'll get around to it in that part. It is, however, going to be a topic for Rocks for their Volume 2, because the paper involved has been misrepresented by a lot of different creationists, including Robinson, and we'll be going into that in gruesome detail in the book, which should be very, very amusing for everybody. Anyway, there is, in fact, some taxonomy on that whole bunch of Corythosaurus and Co's cousins. A 2014 paper from Jing et al. That I will be putting links up to. It not only covers a new one with transitional aspects, Zhang Hengalong, but also suggests that that particular group is originating in Asia, which brings up again a biogeographical issue, which is again absent from the YEC cartoon. Asia was connected into the zone that links up with the island archipelago in the Tethya Sea, and then you've got farther south areas like Africa, and there's occasional land bridges across to the western half of North America. There's a biogeographical context for all of the Cretaceous, and we're getting nothing, not even a hint at it. There's nobody they can even cite in the creationist literature that's going to deal with any of that biogeographical context in even a cartoon level. You get Tim Clary and his stupid mega sequences, which they'll basically have a map of a normal United States and then these little mega sequence stuff laid over it. No clue as to what the hell they think was going on in the pre-flood world, because each one of them would have to kind of think this through on their own, because there is no ongoing creationist technical literature as to how they would work out paleofacies and all of that. You get kind of simplistic cartoons, which we're also going to be alluding to in the new book. Zonation model that Ariel Roth comes up with, which is basically the idea that the critters are living in like a staircase that ends up being fossilized at the same level somehow or other. That supposedly stuff that's older is kind of down the slope. It doesn't make much sense. But they think it looks cute, and once in a while Andrew Snelling kind of follows that kind of a cartoon model, but the rest of them don't even get that far, so it's just ludicrously pathetic, and that relates to catastrophic plate tectonics and hydroplates and all the other little sidebars which we'll be having alluded to in the new book. Anyway, the second taxon that we're dealing here is Edmontosaurus, which is a nice old critter, named for the Canadian province. or particularly it's the Seckenberg mummified example, and that's soft tissue angle, I think, is the reason why they're bringing it up, because it's, again, a kind of a sidebar catch-all group as to how many different critters were identified as that taxon and how they've been renamed over the years and so forth. Anyway, they're asserting that, quote, evolutionists now agree that this mummy was buried rapidly, unquote. And they're citing a general 2008 book on soft tissue preservation from National Geographic, perfectly fine little book. And that work also figures in the Wikipedia account of that particular mummified example. So it's possible they're just riffing off of the Wikipedia listing. At any rate, it can't be assumed that rapid burial is the same thing as big slosh flood burial. And when you actually look at the fossil, it clearly isn't a mummy in the way Ötzi the Iceman is, where you have all of the soft tissue and this detailed skin features and all that kind of stuff. No, you have actually bones, and there's parts of it, such as on the tail and other areas, where they've got skin portions popping up, and even some of the little tissues, remnants of them around the beak and a few other things that don't normally get popped up. So there was a paper from 2014 by Davis, which I'll be putting a link up to, which incidentally is not cited by our crowd at Sarfati and Tay, which delves into why there are so many hadrosaur skin preservation. That it's in fact the bulk of skin impressions are known from hadrosaurs. And they argue that it's very possible that they were thicker or some other different feature that makes them more likely to be preserved, because other ones that it doesn't seem to be correlated with taphonomy or whether or not they're in a hot or a cold climate or the paleoclimate involved. So that factor is very possible. We'll be continuing on with the smattering of additional ones over the next weeks, but there's not a huge number of sources. It's one of the shortest chapters for references that I've seen, and a big chunk of it is just recycling creationist material. There's an awful lot of referencing of Gregory Paul's Dinosaur Encyclopedia, which I don't have in my reference field, and it's, I think, from like 2016. They cite it a lot. So they're getting some of the basic forensics that they're simply copying into their listings, but they're not bothering with the technical literature typically on these taxa, and that's, I find, rather revealing. So anyway, now on to our exciting world of Casey Luskin. We're now up to 56 papers that we've looked into out of their 800 plus. So we're still a long way to go. We get that. But so far, more than almost half of them, 43% so far, have been snagging that theodicy issue, and one of which is in the latest batch. We still haven't added a single additional paper that warrants their blanket notion that retrotransposons or these other genetic elements, that the dominant amount of them are functional or likely to be functional, which is pretty much what we're expecting from all of that. We're going to go through every bloody one of them. The odds are that most all of them will be able to put up full text. There may be a few little minor stragglers that we'll have to put a link to a shortened version. One of the science websites that will have often big chunks of the thing. They'll have more than just the abstract, and they'll have a big pile of a lot of the references and the conclusion section. It's not a complete article, but sometimes it can be, roughly a third of it available open access. And so a few of those cases we may have to get to. But anyway, they've got a paper from 2023 by Xi, which we will be putting up open access. And it's on the anti-aging effects on skin that connect up to ALUs via a pathway that the Luskin list otherwise has absolutely nothing else on, which is kind of surprising. Typically, when they bring up particular genetic material, and I've gone to look for secondary material, follow-up stuff, I'm hitting other sources that are on their list. This time it was a dry well. However, there is the subtopic of that skin fibroblasts that does show up later on their list. And those are the one we're going to be going into, including that Germanguz paper that we mentioned last episode. So anyway, it was clear that the G paper is not suggesting that ALUs were doing this skin helping thing naturally. It's just as that if it was injected into the system, it could slow the fibrillast senescence by affecting an existing component, the KIF15 part, which otherwise they don't have any references on in their 800 list. And so theoretically could have some therapeutic utility. Now, the papers that are kicking in on the fibrillast matter, one is one of the oldest so far on their list from 1985 by Edwards, and it's on the B2 bunch over in mice, which the ALU cousin that has proliferated in their side of the affair. And again, they're not claiming about how much of those do what, any proportions in that. So it's not going to be helping the designed argument or the notion that the majority of these B2 retrotransposons are actually functional. The next paper is more recent, 2006 from Cohen, which again, though, is much different. Most all of the material that they've been doing has been from relatively recent material. I put up my thing of so far, 43% of their papers have been from the 2020s, 41% from the 2010s, and which is already picking off 84%. And then 14 from the 2000s, which is where this 2006 is. And then that one lowly paper from 1985. Now, as we go through the whole system, we'll find out just how, whether any of those proportions go. So far then, they are actively misrepresenting primarily recent work rather than trawling material that has previously been discussed in the intelligent design apologetic literature. So I get the impression that they're going through and trawling stuff, maybe deliberately, to have stuff that they weren't discussing in earlier apologetics to show us how robust their argument is. But so far, it's looking like it's not so much robust. They've just slammed into anything that has an abstract or a title that sounds like it's going to be helping their case, or simply on the topic that they're bringing up, like the fibroblasts. So that 2006 paper was one of the more preliminary works on this, where it's just about fibroblasts, and they're noticing that the genes seem to be enriched in ALU repeats, which, of course, the more recent G paper is connecting up to what those things theoretically could be involved in fibroblasts, and whether some of them could, in principle, have some therapeutic effects if you use them not necessarily in the same context. Which brings us then to the most recent one on their list of Cantarella 2019, which is on more ALU modulation of those fibroblasts and how its impact on the expression levels could impact cancer proliferation. So that's the one that's snagging on the theodicy angle. They can't seem to get away from that. It's at 43% of the papers so far, total of 24 of them, are directly related to that. Now, will be fun to see how the proportions and things alter as we plow along bi-weekly all the way through the bloody lists. I don't anticipate any of those over the overall proportions to really change all that much, but we'll be finding out. We're going to go through all of them. Anyway, a funky little thing that I saw today on the YouTube was coverage of Elon Musk's rocket launch of his big booster. The man is a Trumpista nincompoop, and the Cybertruck is a mess. But the rockets are kind of interesting. Now, we'll get in that. Anyway, the interesting thing about it, and as far as I know, I can't remember from all of my study of science fiction stuff, nobody had ever taken this approach before. So SpaceX is rather ingenious in the idea of having a big booster and then the secondary rocket on top. And the booster launches fine, and it's jettisoned. And instead of trying to use the little lander pad approach, the way the earlier models were, they have a different approach, which is to drop the rocket down. It has no landing gear, and it dropped the rocket down to the gantry, which then gets snagged by a big clamp. And that's a very ingenious idea, because it eliminates the weight and details of having to have the landing gear assembly. You got to make sure you land where the grappler is going to be. But that level of technical precision seems to be maybe easier to achieve than trying to land on a different context where all of the grappling part is coming from the fixed landing crane rather than anything on the rocket. So I must say it's an ingenious thing to see. And apparently they're also going to be bringing the little module back on top. And it, I guess, is using the little approach to rocket land. But anyway, they're supposedly going to be dealing with. There's one fellow who was apparently going to be on one of these future flights that was doing the little show on the thing, and he was absolutely giddy over it. And I said it was very, very impressive. It's an intriguing little piece of technology. I don't want SpaceX to have a monopoly on American launch systems. Which is why I'm rooting for Boeing to get their head out of their ass and to be able to get their competing systems functional in a way that maybe will require them to up their systems and go back to the old tradition of Boeing rather than their corrupted McDonnell Douglas homunculus approach that's happened since then. But anyway, we'll be dealing with all of that in due course. Now, let me put up our patrons, without whom life would be much more complicated in the getting by week after week, month after month department. Thank you, everybody who are colleagues and researchers and assistant researchers and friends and our various legacy patrons who have helped in and out and up and down over the years. I know that finances and difficulties of circumstances can easily mean that you have to beg off on this, but I cannot thank you all more for those who have been able to stick with us through thick and thin all of this time. It makes a difference because this and the book royalties that I'm getting from the works that I've got out so far and my Social Security is my income. So we make the best we can out of what we can. I have no inherited wealth in the way of a Trump or a Musk. And I'm not, you'll notice there are no commercials or anything on this feed. I think it's weird when you encounter even like Midas Touch will occasionally have adverts on there for from Eric Trump asking for money. What does a billionaire need money for? I'm not sure, for the campaign. I'm curious about that. Anyway, you're not getting any of that in this kettle of fish. I happen to spot as well, just poking around on the internet, that there was this Skylink down in Australia that apparently is their version of Fox Trump Pravda. Because they were just extolling Donald Trump, who's not Australian. Why are they giving all this coverage? But anyway, they were doing something on supposedly how witty and humorous Donald Trump is. He's certainly able to snark and make jokes, and particularly derisive jokes about other people. But maybe they'll never notice the fact that Mr. Trump never seems to laugh and may physically lack the capacity for spontaneous laughter, which is, I think, kind of creepy. But that's another kettle of fish. Anyway, it's going to be interesting then. We're nearing the end then of the dinosaur segment with this. Once we get through the taxa on the hadrosaurs, then we're moving into the non-dinosaur things because they've got a chapter that's dealing with pterosaurs and marine reptiles and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure they'll be alluding to some of the soft tissue material with the mosasaurs. I'm kind of predicting what's going on, even though I haven't plowed through too many of their references in advance. And then, of course, their double chapter they're going to be having on trying to land-based bird evolution. There, of course, we're going to get tons of Alan Fiducia. I mean, we can just expect the kind of apologetics, but it'll be intriguing to see how much of it is just rehashing the material that's already been in their apologetic frame, and how much of it they'll want to keep as close as possible to CMI apologetics. Because one thing that I've been really noticing on here is how much of their stuff is in-house, and how relatively reluctant they are to venture outside of that little box. If it's the case that they're more willing to allude to an intelligent designer then to an Answers in Genesis or ICR post, that will be kind of interesting. So we'll be able to see a little bit more of that dynamic as we move farther down the series. So anyway, I don't see anybody in our chat. So apparently we've got no one immediately watching the show around our big wide world. We got a good 20 minutes in there. Let me put my advert up for Rocks Were There, Volume 1. We're Busy Billy Beavers. I'm just collating the material now, last minute material, plowing through the more recent issues of Acts and Facts and sorting out the latest 2023 creationism conference papers. That's quite a lot of that relates to cosmology, and then other bits that are going to be alluded in different contexts. We'll want to make all of that as up to date as possible. So let me pull up my Rocks advert. And remember as well that we've only got like 20 some odd days until Election Day. So for those who make sure you are properly registered, and for heaven's sakes, make sure you vote. And pay attention to everybody downstream as well. Don't just simply focus in on who's at the top of the ticket, but pay attention even down to who is running for school boards, who's running for election commissions, who's running for Secretary of State. There's a whole slew of positions where screwball minds can produce terrible screwball effects. Okay, so let's get our little show on the road there. And in about 10 days, there will be the conference here in Spokane on Christian nationalism, which will be contributing some handout flyers and things to, and seeing Andrew Seidel and a few other people. That will be perilously close to our election day here. And I'll give a report on that as in the evolution out following that, so we can see how that went, what kind of discussions in that was going. I'll be banging the drum of source methods, where people really need to pay more attention to source issues. There was a bit where the New York Times was interviewing J.D. Vance, and she asked him again and again and again whether Trump had won the 2020 election, and he kept on sidestepping and tap dancing and saying, I won't want to go a gotcha question and so forth. And yipes. Speaker Johnson is the same way. Vance repeated the same song and dance when he was on this week, over the weekend. And he would just vaguely allude to, but Mr. Trump and I have concerns about the previous election. Well, what concerns? Based on what? What sources? What documentation did you have? Do you attempt to fact check any of that documentation? Any better than you did the Haitian dog eating thing? Is there any evidence that Mr. Trump has ever in his life ever fact-checked anything? If you were exploring that source methods issue, I think we would be able to at least clarify the degree to which the ideologue Vance is disconnected from the sound method that would be required to make sound judgments. And that's another indication of why these people shouldn't be in political power. Okie doke. Well, anyway, short half-hour show in. No one's in the side chat, so everyone will be catching the program at a later date. And everybody stay safe. If you're in like the flood areas that have gotten hit, or there are a few in war zones, Stay bloody safe about that. We're in kind of a comfortable mode here in Spokane. The temperatures are going to be bouncing along in the 70s for a few more days, and then we'll be kind of going back more to our more normal temperature line in the 60s. And so anyway, everybody stay safe. Keep an eye out for the wooden penguins. If you register to vote, and heaven's sakes, vote. Apply reasoned and sound methods to every candidate that you can find, and because it's all up to us. And anybody that's way younger than me, remember, we're making the future you're going to be living in. And if you aren't paying close attention to this stuff, you're going to be handed a future that is not maybe what you would want to live in, and will be a mess. So I don't want to be living in a messy world. I plan on being around for quite some time more. Got a lot of books left to write. And anybody that's way younger than me has every incentive in the world for us to get this stuff right on the climate and war and health issues and economic disparities of wealth that needs to be resolved in order to have that progress stuff to get to that like Star Trek world that we would like to live in, rather than Dune or Star Wars, where we have way too many stormtroopers and people eating sandworms. So anyway, everybody stay safe, and we will see you all next week with our next